And of course, when I got actual users, this is when the real fun began. Um, so just, I don't know why, but the way this program worked, most people used it in the US in the evenings on either Sunday nights or Wednesday nights. And so I would get like almost no load in between those times. But during those times, everyone would smash it. And I had a lot of issues, chiefly this database system. So, like, I remember, being at the church on a Wednesday night, checking kids in, using this program that I was so proud of and I had actually sold to people and people were actually using it. And I would try to like mark a kid as present and it like wasn't working. And I checked the console and like my requests were timing out sometimes. And oh man, it was a nightmare. So I'm like SSHing into the server, trying to debug it while I'm also trying to check kids in and getting emails from customers like, hey, it's kind of being weird. What's going on? And this happened, for 2 or 3 weeks. And I was just frantically trying to fix it. Turns out this was, because of this database system, a number of issues. Um, so I took a really deep dive into the source code of this database, my source code, trying a bunch of different things, writing a bunch of tests. Eventually, I figured out a number of issues, primarily around the way I was doing mutexes and locking and a bunch of other stuff. I ended up creating my own database management system layer to coordinate on top of this. So I created instead of running or connecting to the database directly from each of my web servers, I ran the database as its own server. And then the web applications had clients that connected to it. And so that server could coordinate things. Oh, guess what? This is like, database management systems 101. This is how this is how it's done, right? But I had to learn it the hard way, of course. So I ended up recreating all of this on my own in this new system in Lisp. And I can even look at the source code now and I'm impressed. Like this definitely must have been when testing really started becoming a much bigger thing to me, because having this go down with, it was just horrible. It was like the worst feeling ever. And it made it so I couldn't have a life. I was like tied to my phone and my computer because like anytime I got that message, like your site went down or something, it was like scramble to try to get it back up. And it was just horrible. And so I wrote lots of actually quite, I don't know, even impressive to me, tests today where I was like setting up these really complicated multi-threaded scenarios and, hitting this database management system and checking the results. And I had like performance tests and, anyways, I got it to work and it actually worked quite well. Once I made it over all of these road bumps, yeah, I had real paying users and it was generally going pretty well. To be honest, I thought it'd be fun. So I'm looking through the source code. I thought it'd be fun to talk about some of it because I just recorded an episode on React server components. And what's kind of really fascinating to me is I kind of forgot about this, but I was basically doing a lot of those similar things way back, when I was working on this. So like nearly all of this project, I did it in Lisp. So it was a web application, which meant you had to have HTML and CSS and JavaScript. But I was able to do it all in Lisp. So I think I used a library that allowed me to write like this Lisp data structure that would get output to CSS. And it was sort of like Sass, I think, if you've ever used anything like a CSS preprocessor. It was kind of like that, except way more powerful because you had the entire language of Lisp at your disposal. So that was really cool. But the really probably most fascinating part is I used a Scheme to JavaScript compiler. So Chicken Scheme at the time had this compiler that I think actually the creator of Chicken Scheme created. So you could feed it Lisp code and it would output JavaScript that would run and work. And what I did with it, I think is pretty cool. So basically, I used it to dynamically generate JavaScript. So, you might load a page. I would return that page to the browser or that content to the browser. And along with that, I would return dynamically generated JavaScript, based on the name of the club or the user's information or whatever embedded in this JavaScript. And I would attach it to an event handler, like a button click or whatever, right? And then when that action happened, it would run this JavaScript code that I had written in Lisp, and it had the ability to call a server-side function, anonymous function that would close over any in-scope variables. So basically this meant in my, I don't know what you would call it in other languages, like your controller or whatever, I was able to dynamically hook from the JavaScript side into the server side. And so it would call a server-side anonymous function that had closed over some values, and I could use that to process the data and then return HTML or JavaScript as a result back to the browser. And the way this was all set up, it was pretty seamless. I didn't really have to write any of this glue code. It was just like, it called the Ajax method, passing in like a selector and an action like click or something. And then I could write both the server side code and the client side code that I wanted to get triggered and run in those situations. And it reminded me a lot of working with React server components. Although I'll be honest, looking at this code, it's even better than React server components. Like this is really powerful. Not like trying to toot my own horn or something. I'm not the first one to come up with this, but I mean, it's a really powerful paradigm when you can sort of, mix and match these environments like this. And I did this all over and it worked really well. There were obviously big mistakes I made in this project, like trying to create my own database management system that definitely didn't save me any time, just created grief, right? And, choosing Lisp and choosing this type of environment absolutely was worth it. It wasn't completely smooth sailing. The big downside of this was the JavaScript that this Lisp to JavaScript compiler created. It wasn't like a transpiler, so you couldn't easily look at it. Like if you're trying to debug something, you couldn't look at your Lisp code and be like, oh yeah, here's the corresponding JavaScript code. Because of the way Chicken Scheme is written, it uses continuation passing style. And so that like massively transforms your code. So debugging on the JavaScript side was extremely hard. I think, in this approach, that was definitely the most difficult part. But even then, the amount of time I saved overall was definitely more than, that added. So yeah, it was pretty cool. And, of course, looking through the code, I also would use what's called like S expressions to output like the HTML. It's kind of like JSX, except of course, better. More just because of the nature of Lisp and its own internal data structures are just a little bit easier to work with than JSX is. But yeah, just looking through, this code and this output, it was like, oh, define a page. Here's the path. Here are some arguments it might take, like, a user ID or something. And then it was like I could add some JavaScript to that page. I could render this HTML, all this stuff I was talking about. Oh, here's the CSS that I wrote in Lisp that gets output to this page. The entire project, after, let's say I'm looking at it, after running for, I think a couple years at least, the vast majority of the project was only about 2,000 lines long. So I had everything written in one file. You know me, how much I hate having files all over the place. It seems so pointless, but apparently I found out some VS Code limitation. Anyways, we're not going to go into that now. I put it all in one file and it worked great. It was only 2,000 lines long. And oh yeah, that was another really cool thing. So, I had the ability to reload any part of this application on the fly. So like a deploy, it was so cool. All I had to do to deploy it was I would copy over the object files, like I would compile it on my system, copy them over, and then I would go to a URL that if I was logged in as the right user, it would reload that part of the application with the new version. So I never had to like restart the server or anything. It would just pull in the new code. And it also had this awesome interactive REPL development environment. So if there were ever issues with the server or I was like trying to debug something, I could just log into the server and run Lisp code. This isn't too groundbreaking. If you've used Ruby on Rails, you can log in with Rails to the running instance. It was like that, right? But it was really cool. It was super flexible. Apparently I could like pause the database and resume it. And I think I did that for backups. Yeah. I had my own backup system in place, and yeah, it was. Looking through this, I did a lot at 2,000 lines of code. If this was Ruby on Rails, or I don't know what it would look like in React Server Components, because I haven't done that enough yet, but certainly Java or, Python, it would be a lot more lines of code. Like I couldn't do it. Even me now, 10 years later, I couldn't do it in that few lines of code and, have it be at that level of quality. So I don't know. It's interesting to look at.